You ever watch a neighborhood lose its soul? One rule at a time? I have. My name's Dex Brennan, and I used to think peace and quiet were permanent. Riverside Meadows was the kind of place where you could smell barbecue on Saturdays, where kids' bikes leaned against every fence, and nobody needed permission to live their lives. Back then, we didn't have an HOA. We had trust. I fixed engines in my garage, neighbors waved when they passed, and my late wife Sarah filled the house with the smell of lavender and laughter. She's the one who turned that garage into a workshop. Told me if I rebuilt one more carburetor on her kitchen table, she'd start charging me rent. That workshop became Brennan's small engine repair. 15 years of work, friendship, and community rolled into one little shop at the end of the street. But here's what nobody tells you. Peace doesn't die loud. It dies quiet. One form, one notice, one new standard at a time. It started with a smile. A new neighbor. A clipboard. A promise to protect property values. By the time we realized what that meant, it was too late. My home, my shop, even the truck I parked in my own driveway, suddenly they weren't good enough anymore. I thought I was fixing engines. Turns out I was about to start fixing something much bigger. Because when a neighborhood forgets what community means, someone has to remind them. And sometimes, that reminder comes with motor oil on its hands. It started slow. The kind of change you don't notice until the skyline looks different. One house got torn down, then another. The old cedar shingles and red brick porches that gave Riverside its soul were replaced by tall beige. Boxes with triple garages and manicured lawns that looked copied out of a brochure. They called it revitalization. Called it erasure. The new folks came from corporate jobs and clean shoes worlds. They wanted uniform hedges, silent driveways, and mailboxes that matched. My old Chevy pickup didn't fit that picture. Neither did the smell of motor oil drifting from my workshop. That's when Vivian Thornfield moved in. Picture a woman who'd spent 20 years in corporate compliance and finally found a playground for her spreadsheets. Her house was the biggest on the street, a shadow that blocked half the sunset. Within weeks, she was handing out glossy flyers that said, "Protect property values. Vote Vivian for president." The flyers showed before and after photos. Before always included swing sets, tools, or pickup trucks. After looked like a sterilized version of suburbia. 12 people voted. She won by 3. At first, she played neighborly. Just trying to keep things nice, she'd say, ruler in hand, measuring grass like she was collecting data for NASA. Then came the friendly reminders slipped under doors. Parking positions, noise hours, trash can alignment, little rules that looked harmless until you realized they were weapons. Soon the neighborhood felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence that comes when people stop talking and start watching. And every morning, I saw her beige monument at the end of the street and thought, that's not a house, it's headquarters. The HOA had arrived, and Riverside Meadows would never sound the same again. One morning, just after sunrise, I heard the crunch of heels on gravel outside my driveway. The kind of deliberate sound that says, this isn't a social call. Vivian Thornfield stood there with a clipboard and a man in a polo shirt carrying a camera bag. He looked nervous, like someone regretting his career choices halfway through the introduction. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air, "we're conducting a compliance assessment." The man started snapping photos before I could even answer. My pickup, my workshop, my garbage cans, click, click. Click, like I was starring in some low-budget crime scene documentary. Unauthorized signage, improper vehicle storage, and operating a business in a residential zone, Vivian recited, eyes glued to her clipboard like scripture. I set my coffee down. That small wooden sign's been here 15 years, I told her. And this so-called business is how I fix half the neighborhood's lawnmowers. That's when Mateo Reyes, my next-door neighbor, wandered over. 78 years old, retired courthouse clerk, sharper than anyone gave him credit for. He looked over the clipboard and smiled like a man reading a magic trick he'd already figured out. Revised covenants, you say? Funny, I helped file the originals in 1988. Don't recall anything about sign sizes or home business bans. The cameraman froze mid-snap. Vivian's smile tightened. These are updated community standards, she insisted. Mateo nodded slowly. Updated by whom? No answer. Just the sound of gravel as the photographer packed up and retreated. That's when I realized this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control, and that clipboard in her hand, it wasn't a list of rules. It was a weapon dressed like paperwork. That afternoon, Mateo came over with a folder so old it smelled like courthouse dust and coffee stains. Thought you might want to see what's actually on record, he said, laying it out on my kitchen table. We spread the papers like detectives in an old movie. Handwritten notes, subdivision plats, and developer filings from 1988. No mention of business restrictions. No mention of signage limits. Just basic maintenance standards and a clause most people would have skipped over. The grandfather provision. It protected any small business that had operated continuously for 5 years or more. Mine had been running 15. Mateo tapped the page. You're not just allowed, Dex, you're protected. For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest unclench. We weren't the problem. We were the history this neighborhood was built on. But that relief didn't last. 2 mornings later, I found a certified letter stapled to my workshop door. Cease all commercial activity within 72 hours or face $500 per day in fines. It came from Thornfield Legal Services, printed on letterhead that looked official enough to fool a judge. I called the number listed. A man's voice answered the voicemail. You've reached Harold Thornfield's Business Consulting. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I'm not busy helping my wife with her neighborhood improvement projects. That's when it clicked. Her legal department was her husband's side hustle. The same people enforcing the rules were the ones inventing them. I looked out at the roses Sarah planted along the fence, their petals catching the evening sun, and thought, 15 years of honest work, one signature away from being erased. Paperwork had become a weapon, but now I had my own ammunition. The truth buried in a file from 1988. After that certified letter, the harassment changed gears. It wasn't about the workshop anymore, it was about breaking me down, one phone call at a time. Monday, my insurance company called. We've received reports about unsafe business practices at your property, Mr. Brennan. Tuesday, the bank wanted to review compliance concerns tied to my home equity line. By Wednesday, I was on the phone with the IRS about a potential unreported income review. 3 days. 3 different agencies, all triggered by anonymous complaints. Mateo shook his head when I told him. This is systematic, Dex, classic administrative pressure. File enough complaints and even innocent people fold from exhaustion. But folding wasn't in my wiring. I started documenting everything. Names, times, call logs, even the hold music. Every attack went into a binder labeled Harassment File 1. I wasn't sure who'd read it yet, but I wanted the truth ready when the time came. Then came the twist that almost made me laugh. Across the street, Harold Thornfield, Vivian's husband, was running a consulting business out of their garage. Fresh paint, a new sign, clients coming and going all day. The irony hit like exhaust fumes. The woman threatening fines for unauthorized commercial use was living with a full-blown home office operation. I called city zoning myself, asked if the HOA had enforcement power. The clerk on the other end chuckled. Sir, HOAs can make suggestions, not laws. Only the city can issue violations. I hung up, staring at my notes. Every letter she'd sent, every fine she'd threatened. It was smoke, no fire. Vivian wasn't enforcing the law. She was impersonating it. And that meant the next move wasn't fear. It was exposure. Once I knew Vivian's authority was paper thin, I wanted proof. Something solid enough to show this wasn't just me being targeted. Mateo and I spent a Saturday walking the block, clipboard in hand, doing what she did best, documenting. 9 homes ran small businesses. Piano lessons, tax prep, dog grooming, daycare, even a bookkeeping office 2 houses down. Every single one had clients pulling up daily. Out of those 9, only 3 had received citations. Me, the single mom running a daycare, and a retired veteran who fixed bicycles for neighborhood kids. That wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern. Mateo frowned. Targeting older residents in working-class homes. Classic selective enforcement. Back home, I pulled county filings online and searched for the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. Nothing. Not one incorporation record. Not one listing in the state database. The next morning, the picture got clearer. The HOA wasn't just overreaching, it didn't legally exist. No registration, no EIN, no authority to collect dues or issue fines. Every violation notice Vivian sent was as binding as a grocery receipt. That's when my phone rang. Harold Thornfield. His voice was calm, rehearsed. Dex, perhaps we can find a middle ground. Maybe waive your fines if we, move forward amicably. I almost laughed. Harold, there's no middle ground between right and fraud. You'll return every penny she's taken and she'll step down. That's the deal. He sighed like a man realizing the script had changed. Mateo leaned over my desk afterward. You know what you just did, Dex? Yeah, I said. I stopped defending myself and started fighting back. From that point on, the neighborhood bully had a new problem. Documentation thicker than her rulebook. The next wave hit harder and dirtier. One morning, I walked out to find 3 envelopes stacked neatly on my porch, all stamped with county seals. At first glance, they looked official. Business license suspension, property tax reassessment, zoning violation hearing. All addressed to me. The wording was professional, the signatures convincing. But something about the ink smelled off, literally. Fresh toner, like they'd been printed that morning. I called Mateo. Within the hour, he was at my kitchen table with his reading glasses and courthouse instincts. He dialed the numbers on each letter. County clerk, assessor's office, zoning department. Not one had any record of my case. Dex, he said finally, tapping the page. These aren't mistakes. They're forgeries. That was the moment I realized this wasn't neighbor drama. It was document fraud. Later that week, Deputy Martinez showed up, not with a citation, but with a notebook. We're seeing a pattern of false reports tied to your address, she said. Keep every document. The DA's office is watching. Vivian must have sensed she was losing ground because her next attack hit below the belt. She brought up Sarah, claimed there were deed issues, hinted I might not legally own the property because the paperwork was never updated after my wife passed. That one hit different. But Mateo wasn't shaken. He came back 2 days later with property records and something else, evidence. Dex, she's done this before. 4 neighborhoods in 10 years. Creates an HOA, targets specific houses, pressures owners to sell, then flips the lots for developers. Suddenly, it all made sense. Vivian wasn't just enforcing fake rules. She was running a business, one built on fear, paperwork, and other people's homes, and this time, she'd picked the wrong street. When people get pushed far enough, they stop whispering and start comparing notes. Mateo came over one evening clutching a manila folder like it held a live wire. Got something, he said, spreading printouts across my workbench. Bank records. Transfers from 6 neighbors, each labeled fine payment, all deposited straight into Vivian Thornfield's personal account. Not an HOA fund. Not a maintenance pool. Her checking account. Then came the next document. State filing records. Turns out, Vivian had tried to incorporate the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association earlier that year, but the application was rejected for missing paperwork. She never fixed it. The state flagged it as inactive and unauthorized, which meant every fine, every demand letter, every official-looking threat was completely illegal. That same night, Mrs. Amelia from down the block knocked on my door. She was shaking, holding a crumpled envelope. I paid her $450, she said softly. She said it was for landscaping violations. My husband was in the hospital. I didn't want trouble. Behind her stood her daughter Linda, home from law school. One look at those documents and her expression turned to steel. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "this isn't harassment anymore. This is criminal fraud." Word spread fast. Neighbors gathered in my workshop, some scared, some furious, all ready to act. That's when Bertie Kowalski, a local reporter, walked in. She'd been investigating similar HOA scams in nearby counties. "Looks like you've stumbled onto something bigger than Riverside," she said. Deputy Martinez agreed. She suggested I meet Vivian one last time, but this time wear a wire. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was evidence, and as I looked around that crowded workshop, sawdust in the air, anger mixing with resolve, I realized something powerful. We weren't just fixing engines anymore, we were fixing a system. The morning I wore the wire, the whole street felt different, too still, like even the birds were waiting to see what would happen next. Deputy Martinez parked 2 houses down in an unmarked car, pretending to scroll her phone but listening to every word that would come through my mic. Mateo was in his yard, raking leaves that didn't need raking, eyes fixed on me. I walked up to Vivian Thornfield's door at exactly 9 a.m. She opened it wearing a silk robe, and that same thin smile that had ruined more mornings than I could count. "Dex," she said smoothly. "This is unexpected." "Yeah," I told her, stepping inside. "I figured it's time we talked about the money." Her eyes narrowed just a bit. "What money?" "The fines," I said. "Mrs. Amelia's $450, the daycare's $300, the veteran's $200, all deposited straight into your personal account." For a second she froze. Then came that hollow laugh, the kind people use when they're cornered but still think charm might save them. "You've been doing your homework. Enough to know your HOA was never legally incorporated," I said. "Enough to know every threat letter you sent was fraud." She crossed her arms. "You think you can prove that?" "I already did. City records, bank transfers, the state rejection file, and this conversation." Her jaw tightened. "You're recording me?" I met her stare. "Let's just say the truth deserves good audio." That's when she cracked. "You'll regret this, Dex. By tomorrow your workshop will be shut down permanently. You'll lose everything." Her words came out trembling, but the wire caught every one of them. Martinez's voice buzzed faintly in my ear. "We've got it." By noon the warrants were signed. Officers searched the Thornfield home and found what we'd suspected all along: fake letters, payment records, and files on other neighborhoods. A full-scale operation hiding behind suburban respectability. That night the city council chambers overflowed. Reporters lined the walls. Bertie Kowalski had her recorder out. Vivian still tried to play the role of community savior, calling our evidence a smear campaign by code violators. Then Linda Amelia stepped forward and projected the documents: bank records, rejection filings, and photographs of fake letters. Mrs. Amelia herself stood next to her daughter, voice steady, eyes wet, and said, "She took my money while my husband was dying." The room went silent. Deputy Martinez rose. "Mrs. Thornfield," she said clearly, "you're under arrest for fraud, theft, conspiracy, and making threats." The cuffs clicked, echoing across the chamber, and for the first time in months, Riverside Meadows exhaled. 6 months later, the smell of motor oil filled my workshop again. This time it didn't smell like survival. It smelled like peace. The yellow tape was gone, replaced by sunlight streaming across the same workbench where Mateo and I once spread those old subdivision papers. A new hand-painted sign hung above the door: Brennan's Repair, fixing what matters since 2009. Below it, smaller letters read, Community-supported business. Mrs. Amelia stopped by early that morning holding a check with trembling hands. "Triple damages," she said, smiling through tears. "I'm donating half to the scholarship fund. My granddaughter wants to study community law now." I just stood there speechless. That one line hit harder than any courtroom victory ever could. where Vivian's mansion plans once sat. There's now the Sarah Brennan Memorial Garden. Neat rows of tomatoes. Herbs and roses planted where her SUV used to park. Kids run through the sprinklers, their laughter echoing off the fences. Volunteers show up every Saturday with shovels and music. It's messy, alive, and absolutely perfect. Sarah would have loved every inch of it. Deputy Martinez, now Captain Martinez, came by not long after, her badge catching the afternoon light. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, handing me a letter from the Department of Justice. "The FBI task force your case inspired? They've shut down 14 property manipulation schemes across 6 states. Over 300 families kept their homes because you refused to back down." She smiled. "They're calling the new tracking system the Thornfield Registry." Later that week, Bertie Kowalski's article went live. The Brennan Protocol: How One Neighborhood Stopped a Fraud and Sparked a Movement. She wrote about how our case became a blueprint. Document everything. Verify authority and never face corruption alone. That evening, Mateo stood beside me in the garden as the sun dipped low. "You fixed more than engines, Dex," he said. I looked at the families laughing under the gazebo, the smell of grilled corn mixing with rose petals and gasoline. "Maybe," I said. "But we did it together. Because neighborhoods aren't built by HOAs. They're built by people who refuse to be silent. If you've ever been pushed by an HOA, hit like right now. This fight wasn't just mine. It was every homeowner's. Paperwork isn't power. Truth is. Drop your HOA story below. I read everyone. And subscribe because next week, another neighborhood finds out what happens when people stop being silent.